There are those who say that the most beautiful things in this world are born not from joy, but from sorrow. Whether that is wisdom or merely a comforting thought offered to those who grieve, I cannot say. There are philosophers who have argued it both ways, and neither side has ever fully convinced the other. But I know this story, and I leave its meaning for you to decide, as all true stories should be left. It is a story set in the foothills of northern India, where the rivers run silver through green valleys and the snow-crowned mountains stand like silent gods on the horizon, watching over the affairs of men with neither judgment nor mercy. The mango groves, the wide stone roads, the smoke rising from village fires at dusk, the sound of temple bells carried on the evening wind, all of it together makes a world that feels both ancient and alive. It is a land made for great loves. And, as such lands often are, it is also a land made for greater losses. In that land there lived a young king. He was not a king made of marble and distance, the way some kings are, cold, formal, untouchable. He was warm-hearted and generous, quick to laugh, slow to anger, and genuinely loved by the people who served him. He had been raised well. He governed wisely. He was, by almost any measure, a fortunate man in a fortunate life. One season, in late spring, when the heat had not yet settled fully over the valley and the air still carried a freshness from the retreating winter, he met a young woman. Her beauty was the kind that did not announce itself loudly but revealed itself slowly, the way dawn reveals a landscape, first the outline, then the color, then the full and overwhelming detail. She laughed like water moving over smooth stones. She thought like light moving through leaves. The king loved her completely, with the kind of love that does not ask questions or make conditions, and she loved him in return, equally and without reservation. For a time their life together was a kind of paradise that no poet has ever fully described, because some things resist language. But happiness, as it often does, made no promise to stay. Barely a year had passed when she fell suddenly ill. A poisonous creature hidden in the garden brush had bitten her while she walked alone one morning. The physicians came quickly and did everything that could be done. But the venom had moved fast, and the body sometimes surrenders before the heart is ready. Within days, she was gone. The king did not weep loudly. He did not tear his clothes or cry out at the sky. He simply went still, like a candle flame when the wind stops, in that last quiet moment just before it dies. For 2 days he lay motionless at the foot of her bed, neither eating nor speaking, his face pressed to the cold stone floor. Then, on the 3rd morning, he rose. He washed his face, ate a small meal, and called his craftsman. He ordered her body placed in a casket of silver and lead, then enclosed in a chest of fragrant cedar wood bound with gold, and finally set within a tomb of white stone inlaid with gems. When all this was done, he gathered his people and told them what he intended to do with the rest of his life. He would not remarry. He would train a worthy young man as his heir and continue the affairs of the kingdom responsibly. But every remaining drop of his energy, his fortune, his imagination, his very soul, all of it, would go toward building something for her. Not merely a tomb. A wonder. Something so breathtaking that people would travel from the farthest edges of the earth just to stand before it and whisper her name. He called it the Pearl of Love. He chose a high plateau overlooking the valley, a place where on a clear day you could see the great mountain range shimmering 200 miles away like the edge of another world. There he laid the foundation, cutting it straight from living rock. Slowly, season by season, the Pearl of Love began to rise. In the early years it was ornate and delicate, carved stone screens, rose-colored pillars, painted archways, and a green-tiled dome banded with silver that caught the morning sun. It was beautiful in the way that an illuminated manuscript is beautiful, intricate, jeweled, lovingly particular. The white stone tomb rested at its heart like a sleeping child surrounded by flowers. But the king was changing. The young man who had once delighted in flowers and ornamentation was quietly becoming someone harder to read, quieter in his pleasures, more interested in what was left out than what was put in. Years of working daily with stone and light and proportion had changed the way he saw. The small bright decorations that had once seemed to him the height of beauty now seemed crowded and nervous, as though they were afraid of silence. He began to hunger for something larger. Something that breathed. He had the green dome demolished and replaced with one that soared, higher, purer, more absolute. He ordered the carved screens removed. The painted pillars came down. Where there had been ornamentation, he created space. Where there had been color, he brought shadow. Where there had been detail, he gave only silence and scale. The building breathed differently now. People who had watched its construction for years walked through its corridors and felt something shift in their chests. At the heart of the structure ran a great open corridor, long, still, and perfectly proportioned. It drew the eye from the entrance, through towering arched galleries, past the central chamber, and out through a perfectly framed opening at the far end to the distant mountains beyond. The mountains seemed to float there, white and timeless, as though the building had been designed not as shelter but as a lens for looking at eternity. Those who walked that corridor for the first time were often struck speechless. Some wept without knowing why. Others stood with heads bowed, as though they had wandered accidentally into a prayer that was not meant for them but welcomed them anyway. The king visited often. He would stand at the entrance and look. And look. And look. It was almost right. Not yet, but almost. He could feel the building reaching toward something final, the way a long sentence reaches toward its last word and you can feel the word coming before you know what it is. He made small adjustments. Moved a pillar. Raised a ceiling. Changed the angle of a window. Returned the next week. Changed it back. These were not the movements of an uncertain man. They were the movements of someone who could feel the difference between almost and exactly, and who refused to stop before he arrived. One afternoon, standing at the entrance of the great corridor, he made a quiet decision. The decorative canopy above the tomb had sheltered the casket since the earliest days of construction, but now it was too much. Too fussy. Too insistent. It drew attention to itself when the building had long outgrown the need for such gestures. He had it removed. The next day he returned and stood in silence. The day after that, the same. On the third day he brought his chief architect, his master builders, and a small group of attendants. They stood together in the vast stillness of the corridor and looked at what 30 years had made. No one spoke for a long time. There was nothing to say that the building had not already said better. At the far end, at the absolute center of everything, sat the white stone tomb. Unchanged from the beginning. But now, surrounded by all that had grown clean and immense around it, it sat the way a misplaced object sits on a pristine floor. Small. Dark-edged. Interrupting the silence rather than completing it. Inside it lay the queen, the reason, the beginning, the cause of every stone and arch and ray of light in this magnificent and terrible place. The king looked at it for a long time. No one could see what moved behind his eyes. Then he raised his hand and pointed. "Remove it," he said quietly. And no one who stood in that corridor that day could say for certain whether he had become the greatest lover who ever lived, or whether love had, somewhere along the long and luminous journey, quietly ceased to be the point.